It's interesting that you mentioned that, because when this news first broke, I looked at the map expecting to see a much larger swath of the map in Ukrainian colors in the site that I was looking at. And it does look very small, but it feels like a momentum shift. Talk a little bit about what this might mean for Western support for Ukraine, which in recent months felt like it was flagging a little bit.
Well, Western support at the beginning of the year was in doubt. The United States Congress had put on hold a bill providing for renewed assistance, military and economic assistance to Ukraine. And it was only in April that the Congress finally pulled itself together and voted that aid. In the interim, despite the congressional action, there has been more debate and some partisanship around the question of supporting Ukraine. And both former President Trump and J.D. Vance, his running mate especially, have questioned the Biden administration's policy of supporting Ukraine. And one had to think that that was going to be an issue in the fall campaign. Not clear exactly how anybody was going to handle it, but with some anxiety, both in Ukraine and among our European allies, about the staying power of the United States. Now it looks as though there's a kind of renewed, I'd almost call it political glamour to the Ukrainian cause. This is, again, plucky David holding his own against the bumbling, aggressive Goliath. And I think there will be some new confidence among advocates of sustaining support for Ukraine and even of expanding it, because what the case that the Ukrainians are making is, you see what we can do with more support. We're not just doomed to cede ground to the Russians. We have opportunities to put the Russians on the defensive, and why aren't you going to help us? I think that may be a more powerful argument than it seemed 2 weeks ago.
Interesting. So does this do anything for Ukraine's case for getting into NATO?
Well, that's a gradual case. The NATO summit last month chose to reaffirm that Ukraine would eventually get into NATO, but it didn't create any sort of timetable or criteria for moving toward that ultimate outcome. What the summit did do was support the many bilateral arrangements that member states of the alliance have reached with Ukraine to create a permanent mechanism for support. And I think what you're seeing now is the way in which those agreements could operate. Individual countries led by a NATO consensus may feel more confident about giving greater support to Ukraine. Just this week, we've had the announcement of the first operational F-16 fighter jet deliveries and their introduction into Ukrainian forces. There are other items on the Ukrainian wish list that are doubtless going to be discussed in coming weeks and months. But again, the main boost that the Ukrainians get from the past 10 days is the ability to say to their Western partners, we can do this if you really help us.
It will be fascinating to watch this to continue to unfold. Steve Stestanovich, thank you so much for joining us and explaining what we know at this point in time.
We'll come back to this.